Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance, and this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Antonia, and here is her story. Hi, Ollie. I'm writing for a few reasons. First, I've been no contact with the main narcissist in my life for about 13 years now, so I want to make sure people know how awesome no contact is. Second, feel free to use anything in my story as an educational tool, since there are only a few incidents that still bother me. Only those where others were hurt as a way to hurt me. More on that later. And lastly, I'm curious if the narcissist in my life is really a narc. I used to think so pretty solidly a few years ago when I first learned about what a narcissist was, but lately I think maybe I'm wrong, only because some common tropes are not present with the narc I know. So let me know what you think. And don't worry about hurting my feelings. A lot of stuff is so old it really doesn't bother me anymore. So the narc in my life is my dad. To give a full picture, you are so right when you say narcissism is truly a family business. My dad's mom, aka my paternal grandmother, is a narc if I've ever seen one. My dad's dad, my paternal grandfather, might not have been a narc, but he was certainly a piece of shit human being. So my grandma narc was in the hospital giving birth to my dad in 1965 when her husband walks in with another woman and says he's leaving. So my dad was raised by babysitters while my grandma narc worked, which I don't blame her for. But she should never have been a parent. She doesn't love anyone and only lives to compete with her two sisters for who has more money or more prestige or more Victorian pieces of crap. It's weird she became a piece of shit considering her parents. My great grandparents were super nice. I got to spend some time with them as a kid before they passed. My philandering grandpa had 6 kids with 6 different women, and married all of them at some time or another but one. So my dad was an only child with no father figure around, and his mother was not a loving person and only cares about money. So he didn't have a great start at life. However, he basically grew up lying about everything to his mom to get out of any kind of responsibility or consequences for his own actions. It's kind of like his dad. I know this because he and my mom met when they were 15 and started dating, so mom has told me about some of the shit he pulled back then. While my dad had a shitty life growing up, it doesn't excuse his behavior as an adult and after he had kids. My mom found out she was pregnant at 19, and her dad, my maternal grandpa, was an old-fashioned guy and said, "You gotta get married." So she married my dad and gave birth to my older brother just 4 months later in January of 1985. I was born in 1987, and my little brother came along 16 months later in 1988. So you're 30, you went no contact at 17? Is 17, 18? Okay. By that time, my mom already knew what a piece of shit my dad was. So while she always wanted 4 kids, she decided to get her tubes tied after my little brother was born before they discharged her for the hospital. I certainly don't blame her. So if she knew he was a piece of shit, why was she still having kids with him? She had his tubes tied as she got pregnant so she was still having kids with somebody she knew was a piece of shit? So while my dad has been a narc piece of shit for his whole life, my mom was never an enabler of his bad behavior, except having 3 of his kids when she knew she was a piece of shit. Rather, she put a stop to a lot of his shit before he could get started. So my young childhood wasn't bad at all. I always felt my dad really didn't give 2 shits about my brothers and I, but then he wasn't abusive to us. That came later. So to try to keep this novel from becoming a trilogy, let's skip forward a bit. My dad started cheating on my mom when I was about 8 years old. He had gotten a good job thanks to my mom helping him. I'm beginning to see a pattern here of everything your mom does is virtuous, and everything your father would have nothing if not for your mother. That's a dangerous pattern because it's usually a good indication of being of parental alienation. Don't know if that's where this is going. It's what it kind of sounds like right now. Nobody's this virtuous. Even by your own... Even when you're trying to give your mother credit for having her tubes, she had her tubes tied after having her third child with somebody she knew was a piece of shit. He had gotten a good job thanks to my mom helping him, and suddenly his ego inflated because he was making much more money than my mom for the first time since they got married. Some piece of shit, trashy bitch, who was also married at his work, started hitting on him, and because he's all about himself, he thinks he's God, he went for it. Yes, I'm serious when I say my dad thinks he's God. He's not religious at all, but it's apparent in how he talks about himself and others. He used to say that in his entire workplace, an auto manufacturing plant would fall apart without him. LOL, delusional much. The skank my dad was cheating with wanted him to leave my mom to be with her. She did end up divorcing her husband sometime while they were having their affair. This bitch used to call our house and hang up and harass my mom. In the early days of caller ID, my mom has always worked in IT, so we had a caller ID before a lot of other people, and she figured out what was going on pretty quick. Then the bitch had a friend of hers call my mom and tell her my dad was cheating. This was part of her plan to piss off my mom to get her to leave. It didn't happen. I wish it had, but my mom was afraid of breaking up our family, so she didn't. My mom and dad fought pretty bad. It just started off with arguments, but it got much worse when we moved away from the city my brothers and I were born in to move closer to my dad's work, out in the country. My dad's lying got worse. He spent more time having the affair, and things deteriorated pretty badly between my parents. The fighting slowly turned into narcissistic abuse, or at least that's what I think looking back on it. My dad would promise to stop the affair, argue with my mom, and tell her to fuck herself and get drunk and put his hands on her. Fortunately, my mom is 6'2", so while she didn't really fight back, he wasn't able to hurt her very badly. As you can imagine, this is still pretty fucking traumatic for my brothers and I. My dad filed for divorce without telling my mom, until one day she was served with papers by a sheriff and forced out of our house. My dad lied to the court to say my mom was abusing my brothers and I, so she had to leave. It was all bullshit, but he's a really good liar and can be very convincing. He's good at putting on a fake charming demeanor that disarms people and makes them trust him. I think it's because he's been lying for his entire life, so he's had a lot more practice than most people. After my mom was forced out was when my dad's abuse got really bad. My mom was no longer around to push back and keep him in check, and she wasn't around to be the target of his abuse. My older brother bought into my dad's lies about my mom, claiming she cheated first and some other bullshit. But my younger brother and I did not buy the lies. Are you sure they're lies? I find it very, very odd, very, very odd, that she's the one being physically abused and the sheriffs put her out when there's kids in the house. It's just not the way it goes down. I'm sorry, it's just not the way it goes down. There's more to this story. We didn't want to choose sides between our parents, so in my dad's eyes, we spurned him. So we became the targets of his abuse. For the longest time after I got away from Dad, I had a hard time struggling with what he was doing to us. Yeah, he would push and hit me when we would argue, but he wasn't beating me bloody. However, I felt shitty all the time. I later learned that he was gaslighting me. And honestly, I think that's the worst part of this type of abuse. I would try to explain why I was hurting and beg him to stop seeing that stupid piece of shit skank who had helped force my parents apart. But he would dismiss me and say I was being emotional because of my period. Shit, if I was on my period for months on end, you'd think he'd take me to the doctor, right? We used to have these arguments all the time. He would scream at me, push me, throw things at me, even grab me and throw me around. He made my younger brother and I do all the cooking and cleaning in the house. Before my older brother graduated high school, we used to steal my dad's checkbook. He would drive us to the grocery and we would buy food, and my brother would forge my dad's signature on a check. It was damn near identical, so the bank never knew. But when my dad found out, he was pissed. He stopped buying enough groceries for the whole family, and after my older brother moved out to go to college, he only bought food for himself. Wait a minute. Okay, so you were writing checks. The bank didn't catch on. Well, how long did it take him to catch on that you guys were writing checks? And if he stopped buying food after he left, then why were you going to forge checks in the first place? If there was it's hard for me to say at this point, but I don't know here. Like, I don't know. Like, I understand where you're coming from, where you say your father's hitting you and throwing, but you're saying there should never be putting his hands on him. But I'm wondering what the intensity of these battles were and what they were over. You yelling at him after he's divorced your mother, for him to leave the skank he's with, it's like it's not coming from a real rational spot. He still demanded I cook for him, which I stupidly still tried to do. It's hard when you're a 15-year-old girl who just wants to show your father you're a good person worthy of love. So for a long time I was beat down by his words and action, and especially the gaslighting. When I would confront him about his behavior, he would say I was crazy, I was delusional and making things up, and those things never happened. It really started to drive me insane, I think. I often fantasize about taking my softball bat and beating him and the skank to death. The only thing that stopped me was thinking of my maternal grandmother, my grandma, my mom's mom, one of the best people I've ever known. You might wonder why I hate the bitch so much. Yeah, she cheated with my dad, but why be mad at her for his actions, right? Well, the problem is she participated in the abuse. The court stuck us with 50-50 custody between my parents, so it would be a week at mom's and a week at dad's, switch on Sunday afternoons. So this skank bitch would live in my dad's house while we were not there. She would go into my room and take things from me and move things around to just fuck with me. She hated me because she couldn't move in because of me, or at least she perceived me as the problem because I was the one who was vocal about all this fuckery to my dad. Our house had 2 bathrooms, one attached to the master bedroom. Instead of using that bathroom, she made it a point to use the main bathroom and leave her hair in the shower drain just to fuck with me. Look. I don't know if that's the fuck with you. I think you got immersed in your mother's divorce. Now, that's not to say your father's not a narcissist and didn't do some abusive things, but you are way too immersed in your mom's divorce. Trust me, I know this sick shit was intentional. When she and my dad were having their affair and my mom was still at home, this bitch got my dad to scream at my older brother and try to get him to take the skank's daughter to homecoming. What was her fucking plan? To have her kid date and hopefully future stepson? And then what? This bitch is fucking sick. And so was her teenage daughter, who went on dates with with my dad and the skank and took photos of them, knowing they were both married. Talk about some serious fucked up shit. My dad screamed at my older brother to take this girl to homecoming, and my mom had to intervene to tell him to stop. It wasn't until later on that we knew the nice girl he was harassing my brother to date was his mistress's daughter. What a sick fuck, both dad and that bitch. It's weird to describe the way my dad treated me now because I think most people don't understand how bad it really made me feel. I got anxiety so bad I started puking every meal I ate. I started losing weight and got ulcers in my mouth. My dad took me to a creepy sports medicine doctor who said I was lying about my issues. My mom got the court to mandate counseling for me. I think you're being used as a pawn here. My mom got the court to mandate counseling for me, but since my dad was the one to carry health insurance for us kids, it never happened. But if it's court mandated, it has to happen. You can't wait. Stop. Full stop. You can't violate a family court mandate. You can't. You can't. Not as a man, you can't. Maybe as a woman, you can't. A mandate. The only thing you can really fuck with is time. Something like that, you can't fuck with a mandate like that. He stopped buying enough food for my younger brother and I to eat, and he quit giving us lunch money. My brothers and I are very tall and skinny, and they are both 7 foot as adults. But back then, my younger brother and I were so malnourished that my little brother had to sit out of gym for a quarter in high school because his body percentage dropped to 2%, which is apparently dangerously low. Well, wait a minute. If it's a medical problem, then how is nobody stepping in to intervene? He's so malnourished that he has to sit out a gym class because your father's refusing to feed you, and you go to your mother at this point? Dude, there's a lot of holes in this, okay? And it's all painted to make your father look like an asshole. He may be, but I'm sorry to say that this is just not, all this is not, and I've heard some horrible stories. This sounds like something a bitter ex-wife would put their child up to. I'm sorry. That doesn't mean your father's justified for anything he did. All I'm saying is I think both your parents used you. You're giving your mother way too easy of a pass here. Meanwhile, I was still getting straight A's, but I attracted bullies. Maybe they sensed I was beat down. I don't know. And I would get into fights and beat up the bullies, so I had a shit ton of detentions, Saturday schools, and in-school suspensions throughout high school. My dad, meanwhile, couldn't give a fuck as to what was going on and even refused to pay for our school fees as punishment for me because it meant we couldn't get our report cards. I went to our principal and broke down crying in his office, explaining that my dad was a loser who had the money to pay but was doing this to punish me. I begged him at least to release my brother's report card and just hold mine. Instead, he made me a deal. He gave me a job cleaning his house, paying me $10 an hour. What? What? Your principal? To release your report card? Where is this happening? Where is it? What do you mean they hold your report card if you don't? Is this private? Like, what is this? His house didn't need cleaning at all, but he and his wife were some of the nicest people I ever met, and some of the only ones in the shitty rural community I lived in who cared and listened. Oh, and since it was a small town, judgmental community, my dad used his skill lying to say mom was an abusive drunk, so everyone glared at her with animosity whenever she came to school events and games for my brother and I. And he told other parents I was a worthless piece of shit, but then would claim my good grades and my little brother's skill in basketball as something to be proud of. After several years of this shit, I finally realized my dad was never going to change. He would lie and say he would. He would even sometimes cry and put on a show like he was really sorry and things would change, but they never did. I was 17. I remember driving home from school on a Saturday after another Saturday school for fighting, and I had to pass his house on my way to my mom's house. The stupid bitch was there, and she was still living there while we were gone. I just broke down and cried harder than I ever cried before. I don't know why that day was suddenly different, but it was. I think it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I asked my mom to go back to court and get custody of my little brother and I. She was working a shitty job at the time and had no money for it, but she did it anyway. One of the reasons I sometimes doubt my dad is the narc is that my mom is not a narc and not an enabler. I disagree. It seems like such a departure from the typical story I hear on your channel and other communities online. Maybe my dad is just a huge asshole and not a narc. But there is one thing I know for sure. He only cares about himself and no one else. It sounds like you having a lot of doubts about what happened to you. That's why. Listen. The reason you're having doubts about your father is because you don't believe your mother's bullshit. You don't believe your mother. After all these years, there's something like, it ain't adding up. And as many times as you could say your mom's not a narc or an enabler, she absolutely was. I don't know if she's a narc. She's clearly an enabler. Clearly. He uses people for what he can get for himself from them. This includes his mom. I'm convinced that if she was sick in the hospital and he was due to get a big inheritance, he'd accidentally unplug her life support. That's the type of person he is. My mom was able to get full custody, so we only had to see my dad every other weekend, thank God. I became openly hostile towards my dad and his abuse got worse. My little brother one time jumped up to defend me when my dad grabbed me. He ran over and pushed him off me, shouting, "Don't touch my sister." This was one of the only memories that makes me choke up because my brother literally stood up for me when no one else would. It probably wouldn't surprise you that my younger brother and I are very close to this day. Here's the thing. You're saying you got openly hostile. You're already physically violent, very physically violent if you're getting constant fights and constant Saturday detentions and in-school suspensions. Who's swinging at who here? Look, you tell a lot. Like when you try to puff up your story, you end up revealing some key facts here. Okay, you're already have an extreme tendency, obviously, to physical violence, and now you're openly hostile to him. There were many days that he would comfort and console me when my dad wasn't around because he was an unpredictable drunkie the fuck clown and did not come home after work the same time any 2 days in a row because he went to the bar to drink with his bitch. At least when he wasn't around, he wasn't abusing me, but sometimes I think the anticipation of an incoming shitstorm when he would get home was worse, especially when I could drive and had a car, but couldn't legally run away. So wait a minute, you had a car, but he wasn't buying you food. Your story's not lining up here. Your story's not lining up here. How do you have a car but no food? I think this is why you wrote me. I think you wanted me to call you out. I graduated high school and started thinking about how I could get away from my dad. I was 18 and no longer in school, so I was free, but I couldn't leave and never come back and let him know that. I just knew it would be a bad idea. I was going to school 1,100 miles away in the fall. So who was paying for that? Like, he wasn't buying food, but you have a car and you're going to school 1,100 miles away? Your story doesn't add up. It's everything you can do to make your father sound like a fucking asshole and your mother sound like a virtuous saint and yourself. And it's never that way. Regardless if your father's an asshole or a narc, it's never that way. And you know that. I just knew that would be a bad idea. I was going to school 1,100 miles away in the fall, so I figured I would do what women in abusive relationships were supposed to do when leaving an abusive boyfriend, just disappear. I pretended like everything was fine. I got a cell phone of my own via my mom to take to school, and she gave my dad the phone number and my school email address. I pretended everything was fine and quit arguing with my dad. When it was time to leave his house for the last time, I left all my stuff behind. I didn't want to alert him to anything. As much as I wanted to keep some of my items like my artwork, books, and action figures, I was too afraid to tip him off. Honestly, I think I was afraid he would lose his shit and either light the house on fire or just try to kill me. I was scared for my younger brother, but he told me not to worry about the asshole. He would be okay. I used my trip to college 1,100 miles away to go no contact with my dad. Logistically, it would be a pain in the ass for him to try to track me down. I think that worked. I did have nightmares that he would show up at my dorm, but nothing happened. He did attempt to email me once and texted me twice, but I just ignored him. I knew he was a spineless piece of shit because he would always try to get his mommy to fight his battles for him. And fuck that old bitch for the things she did and said to me. But I thought he would try harder to come after me. He never did. This is one of the reasons I think maybe he's not truly a narc. He didn't wig out and try to chase me down. Or maybe I just made myself too costly to go after because, he needed all that money to drink and pay that bill's bitches too. So what, he wasn't paying for your college? Who was paying for college? Your mother had a shitty job. You're living 1,100 miles away. Who's paying for that bill? So in August of 2005, I left and never talked to my dad again. I've had to see him at family functions for my older brother, who is the only one who hasn't cut my dad off. Though since my older brother had kids, 2 little girls, 5 and 3, he's pushed away from my dad because he treats his granddaughters like pieces of shit too. So in the time I've been no contact with my dad and my bitch grandmother, his mom, I've only heard things about him that reinforce my decision. And let me tell anyone struggling with no contact, it's so good. It is so freeing to be away from that stress. It hasn't been easy though. I became very depressed in college, and my psychiatrist explained that when I was dealing with my dad's abuse, I was in fight or flight mode, just trying to survive. My body didn't have time to succumb to depression because of the immediacy of trying to survive. What he said really felt true because there was constant nervous energy, and my body built up to where I could puke every Sunday if I had to go back to my dad's house. No contact also helped with my clarity to see what was really going on and understand that, yes, my dad was abusive. I still had not yet learned about narcissism, but at least I recognized what he did was wrong. The clarity that comes with no contact is also very enlightening. It helps to see the abuse for what it is. Those memories that were made to feel wrong or foggy because of the gaslighting suddenly became a lot more clear without someone trying to tell you you're imagining things. One thing that I think made it easy for me to go no contact is that my amazing grandma, my Grams, my mom's mother, immigrated to the U.S. as a young adult. She and her husband were unable to have kids. So my grandma adopted my mom and my uncle, who are not related to each other. So my whole life I knew my grandma and I weren't blood related. But honestly, the best memories I have of my grandma are the times my friends from school would meet her and say how much we looked alike. Okay, here's the problem. Now I'm even more convinced. Okay, your mom's a problem as well. She's not blood related to your grandmother. That's why your grandmother is obviously outside the spectrum of narcissism. I don't think your mother ever was. So I knew from a young age that family doesn't have to be blood related to be special. The opposite is also true. Your blood-related family is just that, a genetic relation. It doesn't make them family. So don't feel obligated to try to make a relationship with a narc or someone who behaves like a narc work just because you share some DNA. Fuck that shit. My grandmother loved my mom, uncle, and brothers and I like we were our own family because we were her family, the family she chose to love. So don't let DNA guilt you into being abused. Fuck the people who treat you like shit. Get away from them and never look back. Trust me, they'll never change. My dad had surgery to clean out his carotid arteries 2 years ago and had a stroke during the procedure because he didn't take his prescribed aspirin. He shortly thereafter lied to my older brother about a relative's funeral, intentionally to make my older brother miss the funeral. I guess my dad cried about how he may have lost his last kid with how he shit on my older brother. But you know what he did after that? The same old shit. They will never change. After 13 years, a near-death experience, my dad hasn't changed one bit. I'm kind of glad. I'm kind of hoping he just dies off soon so that stupid skank he eventually married will just go the fuck away. And here is your problem in life. You are living your parents' divorce. You're 31 years old, and you're still fixated on her. You took on your mother's anger, you did it all. That's not to say your father's not an asshole. Okay, but I think a lot of this is blown up because you're trying to fight your mother's divorce for her. And I think your mother's letting you do it. Both your parents are using you. Your mother's no angel in any of this. She's not. She's letting you starve. That's on her. Where is she? She got her own house. She could have gotten custody of you a lot earlier. So either it's being blown up more than it was, or your mother's the enabling piece of shit you've been denying her of being. Where was she? During all this abuse, where was she? They gave 50-50 custody, right? He's only 53, but looks like he's 65 and sickly, so odds are in my favor. When he goes, I'm going to write an obituary like those siblings in Minnesota who told the truth about their piece of shit mom. Anyway, this is way longer than I wanted it to be. Sorry for all the rambling, Ollie. I just wanted to get this shit out. I think I was partly want validation, too, from some folks who will understand. When I tell some friends about the things my dad did, sometimes they're too stunned or shocked to really react. I don't blame them. It's pretty fucked up. And while I don't want anyone to suffer like I did, it's kind of cool to know there's people out there who understand. Thanks for all you do, Ollie. I hope my contribution helps. Antonia, in honor of my grandma. Well, Antonia, I mean, I'm going to be very honest with you. I mean, not to say that your father's not a narc and have the tendencies and isn't an asshole, but you are living your mother's divorce, and she's the one who let you do it. Going in there, getting in the physical fights, fighting her battles. Your mother used you. At 30 years old, if your main focus is his new wife dying, you're still not living your life. You're still not living your life because you're living the narcissist divorce. And that's on both your parents. It's on both of them. You could say your mother's not a narc or an enabler all you want. It ain't true. You have put all your anger and rage on one person so you don't have to look at the other. Your mother's just as responsible for this because there's just holes in the story and things that don't make sense. Like you say, he's starving you because you weren't getting enough food, so you were forging the checks. The bank didn't know, but then your father found out, then he started not buying enough food. He's not buying food, but you have a car. You're going to college. I mean, I don't know how you paid for college, but that's pretty 1,100 miles away. That's pretty expensive. You're blaming one narc to protect the other. You can't put all the blame on one narc when there's another. And that's exactly what you're doing. That's why you're so confused. You need to just come clean with yourself so you can move past this. It's not to say what your father did, cheat and run away. He's not a complete fucking asshole. He probably is. Okay, but you are letting your mother off the hook and you know it. And that's why you're still having issues and you're writing in. Hoping I light you up. So, I hope that helps. Thank you so much for your contribution and your story. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comments section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook live chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it growing, successful, and advancing, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from you guys. Without you, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been The Narcissistic Resistance.